There is a saying that to others, everything seems to have been handed to you on a silver platter. To outsiders, it was easy to mock his worth since he was the grandson of the Sungine Group's chairman. Being the third generation of a wealthy family, many people in the country knew exactly who he was. His fame and fortune were like two sides of the same coin, and he could not separate them on his own. Thinking of a way to fix this, the young man finally came up with a plan inside his classroom. The first part of his grand master plan began the moment he filled out an important test. With his pen in hand, he decided he could not appear too talented to avoid drawing attention. According to him, talented people are noticed and overwhelmed by a pressure they never asked for. Soon after, he started the second part of his plan while continuing to fill in the answers. On the other hand, he also could not look like a complete failure so he would not be tossed aside. In his family, the rule is simple and there is no reward for goodness or kindness. The chairman of Sungine is a relentless and strict businessman. His grandfather shows no leniency even to his own family for any major mistake. Even as in Heir, he would be treated worse than an intern if he did not show some skill. In this fierce environment, intense competition is what took the company to the top of the world. That is why the goal of his plan is to be just good enough not to deserve a subsidiary company, but at the same time, not so pathetic that he could not inherit a single building in Gangnam. Back in the classroom, the teacher starts talking to the students about the results. He announces that their classmate Hyun Sang Yun scored 301 points and ranked first in the class. With this excellent grade, the teacher assures him that his spot at Korea University is guaranteed. The master then asks which department the young man intends to study in and what his family's preference is. With a calm expression, the boy simply replies that he is still not sure about it. The teacher laughs and says that business or economics would be easy, but the young man thinks about agricultural sciences. Suddenly, the boy's expression changes, and he declares that he is actually going to law school. The revelation causes an immediate reaction of shock from the teacher, who cannot believe it. His classmates are equally amazed and wonder if they heard it right. The protagonist smiles because that was the reaction he expected, since his score is low for law. This was his first step toward a quiet life, as he aimed for a very specific score. The plan was to fail at the elite university and then enroll in the same course at a simpler one. That way, his grandfather would have a neutral reaction, neither liking nor disliking the final result. With his carefully average grade, the perfect plan was to be rejected by the law school. But what he holds in his hands is a completely unexpected acceptance letter. Completely shocked by the result, the boy is left speechless and does not understand what happened. Standing in the middle of the room, the young man wonders why his plan went so wrong. At that exact moment, the television announces the exam results have been released. The news reveals that for the first time in 30 years, the law department did not fill its open spots. Because of this, and according to the new guidelines, the university made a decision. They decided to accept all students scoring over 100 points to fill the vacancies. The boy cries out in despair because his first big plan had gone down the drain. Sometime later, in a luxurious house, the protagonist's family is gathered together. His grandfather lets out a huge laugh and seems extremely happy with the whole situation. He asks the others if they have any idea how proud he has been walking around lately. The chairman of the Sunhwa group says he was overwhelmingly grateful that his grandson passed. Vice Chairman Hyun Duk Jae's wife asks her father-in-law not to use that kind of expression. The older man then apologizes and says it was just a figure of speech to express himself. She then says he needs to stick around to see his grandson become the Attorney General one day. The boy panics because he never dreamed of that, and his family is already deciding his future. The grandfather then gets annoyed and asks why his grandson would have to do something like that. The young protagonist just watches the argument unfold between his father and his grandfather. His father says that if his son is going to inherit Sunhwa, the least they can do is support him. To everyone's surprise, the grandfather shouts that Sunhwa does not matter, and the boy celebrates on the inside. He says that the pillar of the family cannot do something ridiculous and tells his son to be careful with what he says. Even with the confusion, the boy's parents thank the older man for thinking so highly of Sang Yun. Soon after, the grandfather and his son get ready to head back to the company office together. But before leaving, the group chairman turns around and calls his grandson for a final word. The older gentleman asks the young man if he needs anything, or if he wants some spending money. With deep respect, the boy bows and replies that everything is fine and he does not need anything. The grandfather smiles and pats his head, saying how adorable that attitude was. But what the young man really wanted was for all that suffocating attention to finally stop. Lacking the courage to say it out loud, he just thanks his grandfather and says goodbye to go inside. The young man knows that one wrong word, and even the support he has now could be taken away. His grandfather is the absolute ruler of Sungwon and the kind of man who would do that without hesitating. Meanwhile, in a luxury car, the chairman and his son travel down the road. Sitting in the back seat, the boy's father is asked what he thinks about the situation. The chairman then clarifies that he is talking about his youngest grandson, young Sang Yun. The son replies that it is still too early since the boy just turned 20 years old. With a cold look, the older man questions if that is really what his Heir thinks about the matter. Traveling through the city, the chairman calls his son Duk Jae by name for a serious conversation. He then asks why his son believes he runs a company of that size. The old man questions if it would be to create value for customers or to generate new jobs. Staring into nothingness, he wonders if the reason would be to contribute to society. The answer is a big no, because a company only exists to make money by buying low. Next, the chairman states that his grandson has already put that exact concept into practice. The grandfather explains that the boy took the exam with the absolute minimum effort needed to pass. He figured out the minimum score and secured the spot, something nobody ever taught him. The son still tries to argue that Sang Yun got lucky, but his father sees it differently. For the older man, if that was truly luck, he could hand the company over to his grandson right now. Completely shocked by the statement, the son calls out his father's name in desperation. The chairman believes that with that level of luck, the boy can lead Sung Ian. Stepping out of the car, he says that 100 smart guys cannot beat one truly lucky guy. Once inside the building, the chairman turns around and gives a direct order to the vice chairman. He commands him to assign someone flexible and reliable to keep an eye on his grandson. The boy's father tries to argue that director Sang Mu is still too young for the task. But the chairman simply orders him to obey, saying the grandson will figure it out if he has ambition. Far away, the protagonist punches his desk and yells out in frustration over his failed plan. He ended up scoring a lot of points with his grandfather, without having the slightest intention to do so. Knowing the old man, he knows it will not be a forgotten joke, and that being called the pillar is a bad thing. Slumping against the wall, his house's antique telephone starts ringing endlessly. Hesitantly, the young man answers the device and asks who is on the other end of the line. The voice introduces himself as Secretary Ju Yong-hoon, a close aide to the chairman. The young man wonders why such an important person would suddenly call him. With a forced smile, he greets Chief Ju and asks the reason for the call. On the other end of the line, the man explains that the chairman ordered a secretary for the young master. The boy agrees, but on the inside, he questions his grandfather's true intentions. With a mysterious tone, Secretary Ju says he still has one more thing to say. He reveals that the chairman also wants to give him a gift to celebrate his college admission. The news catches the protagonist by surprise, and he questions what kind of gift it would be. The secretary informs him that the young master himself should choose what he wants as a prize. Sensing his hesitation, the man says he can decide later with more time if he prefers. The boy imagines asking for something grand like an entire building just for himself. But standing in the middle of his room, he knows he cannot simply ask for just anything. With a firm and determined voice, the young man gives a negative response to the secretary. He realizes this is a test, and if he is greedy, everything he built will go down the drain. So he says he will think about it a little more and let the chairman know later. Thanking the secretary, the boy finally hangs up the call and becomes deep in thought. He needs to think of something that will not make him look like a freeloader, and that puts him at a disadvantage. Elsewhere, his family gathers, and a man comments that Sang Yun achieved something big. The young man thanks his uncle, who seems to be very happy about the college news. The oldest uncle says the boy is worth more than 10 of his useless children combined. Soon, the second uncle, Hein Soo-jae, asks why he is including his son in this story. An Hein Hee-jae also joins the conversation and asks them to leave her son Tae-yoon out of it. The first uncle teases by saying Tae-yoon is a coward, and the other says at least he answers the phone. The woman defends him, saying he is studying, but Sang-yoon knows none of them have any high ground. His cousin, who is a year older, is at university but spends all his time at parties. If their grandfather catches him, he is in big trouble, but as long as he is not caught, nobody cares. Back at the family gathering, someone announces that the chairman is arriving at the venue. Everyone stands up out of respect, but the grandfather just tells them to sit back down. The man thanks everyone for gathering on such short notice for the conversation. Sitting at the head of the table, he begins to explain the reason for that meeting. The reason was to share the good news about his grandson Sang Yun and celebrate with everyone. The boy understands instantly that this is also yet another test from his grandfather. Clasping his hands, he knows he needs to act indifferent, as if it were no big deal. At that moment, his grandfather calls his name, and the young man answers promptly with respect. With a smile, the chairman asks if he has already heard the news from Chief Ju. He then confirms that he is going to give him a gift to celebrate his college entrance. The grandfather asks if he has thought about what he wants, while his uncles are surprised by the offer. The boy remembers that Chief Ju told him to talk to his father about the matter. But he decides there is no time to hesitate because the plan is already in motion. Firmly, the young man confirms to his grandfather that he has already thought about what he wishes to receive. The chairman smiles and, with his hands together, asks him to just say what it is he wants so much. Then, the gift he desires is revealed to be a large building located in Gangnam. His aunt and uncle's reaction of astonishment is immediate at the bold request. His other relative also cannot hide his surprise at the nephew's audacity. Even his father is left speechless upon hearing what his son just asked for. With a smirk, the boy observes everyone's reaction in the meeting room. He explains that he wants a new building for the law school at his university. The boy admits to himself that he has a hidden motive behind that request. And technically, since it is south of the Han River, the location is still within Gangnam. The chairman immediately notices his grandson's cleverness with that smart request. With a slight smile, the grandfather reflects on the request for a university building. After a moment of silence, the older man begins to laugh loudly at the table. The other family members are left entirely confused and just let out nervous chuckles. Suddenly, the chairman stands up and says he knows exactly what he's going to do. A short time later in his office, he calls one of his employees in for a chat. Chief Jew enters the room and makes himself available for whatever the chairman needs. The grandfather then asks what boys of Sang Yun's age want the most these days. He clarifies that he does not want to know about his grandson, but rather about ordinary young men of the same age. The secretary replies that most dream of having imported cars or luxury items. The chairman agrees, as that was exactly what he expected to hear as an answer. But instead, his grandson was different and asked for a university building. Sitting in his chair, the chairman wonders if he interpreted the whole situation wrong. Elsewhere, the protagonist reads a news article about a 600 million won donation. He is satisfied because the gesture makes him look like someone who knows nothing about money. At that time, an apartment in Seoul cost 12 million, so the situation was a wash. With this, he tarnished his image as a genius for getting into college by showing he is bad with finances. Now, with the first part complete, the young man gets ready to put Plan B into action. The idea was to have mediocre grades and thereby lower his grandfather's expectations of him. Sometime later, a driver calls him saying the car is already waiting to take him. Inside the vehicle, the boy comments that he could go to orientation alone, but the driver disagrees. The man explains that to get to the campus by subway, he would have to hike up a mountain trail. The young man thinks it is an exaggeration and cannot believe that man is the one going to look after him. The driver then says the station's name is deceiving and is not quite as he imagines. He reveals that it merely has university in the name, but none of the students call it that. The boy is surprised and wonders how the driver knows such a specific detail. With a smile, the man introduces himself as Lee Byung-sik and reveals he graduated from there. He says he is from the class of 71, making the young man recall a conversation. With wide eyes, the boy finally understands what his grandfather meant at dinner. The phrase was about having found yet another Sungyeon child for him to look after. The assistant adds that he has orders to help him with any problems in his studies. And the main order was specifically not to let his grades drop, ruining Plan B. It turns out that last semester, he barely managed to stay at the top even while trying very hard. That was his maximum, so his perfect plan of looking mediocre had gone down the drain. With a look of despair, he sees his entire plan crumbling right in front of him. Not knowing what to do, the boy just puts his hands on his head in total frustration. Back in the car, the driver gets worried because the young master looks like a pale ghost. With a tired face, he says he is fine and asks to just continue the trip to college. Looking out the window, he concludes he will need a plan C as soon as possible. Far away, his family is still discussing the building request and his intentions. One of the uncles says the boy was always smart, but his father thinks something is wrong. Another man present at the table then asks what exactly seems so strange about it. The father finds it weird that his nephew asked to rebuild the school gate instead of getting a gift. One of the uncles questions if he should find that weird and calls him a youngster in the conversation. He explains that being generous now is a way to secure allies for the future. The other uncle counters by saying they are just kids and there is no harm in a good deed. Annoyed by the answer, the first uncle asks what he means by that conversation. The aunt then joins the discussion and says they will become allies for Do Yoon later on. She adds that a solid foundation is built from the basement up, not from the roof. The second uncle mocks everyone and says they are worrying about a building that does not even exist. He then provokes the others to worry about building their own foundations. The provocation is directed at Sung Jae, who is completely shocked by the accusation. The uncle reveals that no one can find Tae Yoon and makes a sarcastic remark about the whole situation. Full of anger, Sung Jae yells, but the other simply announces that he is already leaving. The aunt tries to calm him down and jokes that he should take home a cute new grandson. Out of patience for the conversation, the man stands up and announces that he is also departing. Alone at the table, the young man is left with an expression of pure frustration on his face. As time passes, a new year finally begins for the entire extended family. A little girl in traditional clothing wishes her grandfather a happy new year. The chairman thanks her and wishes the same to little Jin-woon, who smiles happily. The scene shows that in the Sungyeon family household, rituals are much more elaborate. The grandfather has a strict rule that everyone must eat together at the start of the year. Suddenly, the chairman calls the attention of the grandchildren, who straighten up right away. With a serious tone, he announces that he will not give the usual Happy New Year speech. He says they need to create their own blessings and set an example for the employees. With a raised voice, the oldest man asks if they all understood the important message. Immediately, all the grandchildren answer aloud with a "Hi, sir," filled with fear. The look of dread on the young people's faces is clear as they answer their grandfather. At that moment, one of the grandchildren calls the chairman in a hesitant and slightly fearful way. The grandfather calls his name, and the young man named Do Yoon promptly replies yes. The chairman then orders him to step forward since he is the oldest grandson. He asks the young man to tell everyone his plans for the new year that is starting. Stuttering, the oldest cousin promises he will study very hard during the upcoming year. The chairman repeats his grandson's words with disdain while the boy tries to finish his sentence. Out of patience, the grandfather interrupts him and immediately calls the next grandson in line, named Jung Yoon. The The boy panics because his cousin's stuttering has already put him at a disadvantage, and he does not know what to say. Annoyed by his grandson's attitude, the grandfather yells that it is enough and orders the next one to step up. Sang-yun thinks that his cousin is not useless, but that his own situation is quite different. After all, he got into law at Korea University and even snagged a scholarship. This may have lessened his virtue, but it put him way ahead of the others in contribution. At that moment, the grandfather calls for Sang-yun, and the boy knows he needs to do something grand. First, he thanks him for quickly starting the construction of the law school building. The grandfather is surprised, and the boy confirms that construction started on January 3rd. With a serious look, the chairman then asks his grandson what his plan is for the year. With everyone's attention on him, the young man finally begins to explain his plan. He says that now in college, he is going to make a lot of friends, just like everyone else does. The grandfather is curious about the answer and asks why he would do something like that. The boy explains that since he has no money, his only resource right now is people. Fortunately, he managed to get into Korea University, a place full of great talents. That is why he decided that building a massive network of friends is the best path for him. In his mind, the boy imagines his grandfather's furious reaction to that answer. He foresees his grandfather yelling that he is an arrogant kid incapable of running a company. The old man would go on telling him to go live off that building and act like an all-powerful snob. Sang-yun was certain this would be his grandfather's reaction, but he was completely mistaken. To his surprise, the chairman smiles and says that, as expected, Sang-yun thinks deeply. The grandfather then turns to Chief Ju and comments on his grandson's impressive attitude. He laughs, saying that for a college boy, his grandson has a lot of courage, and the young man gets confused. With that, the grandfather says he can go back to his spot, but the boy goes into a panic. He thinks he cannot simply step down and accept the situation like that. Clenching his fist, he decides he needs to risk everything before it is too late for him. Wasting no time, the young man turns around and calls his grandfather again to continue the conversation. The chairman is surprised and asks if he still has anything else to say about his plan. Boldly, the young man asks his grandfather what his own plans are for the future. The other grandchildren are completely shocked by Sang-yun's audacity in the middle of the room. All the older relatives also cannot hide their surprise at the question. The grandfather seems unable to believe what he just heard from his youngest grandson. With wide eyes, he wonders if the boy really asked to know about his plan. His uncle cannot believe it and thinks his nephew must have finally lost his mind. The cousins agree and cannot understand how he dares to speak to the chairman like that. Sang-yun's parents also become worried about their son's attitude in front of everyone. The boy thinks that with this attitude, his image will finally be ruined within the family. But right after, he regrets it and thinks that maybe he took it a bit too far. After a tense silence, the chairman lets out a soft sigh and looks deep in thought. Suddenly, the grandfather bursts into loud laughter, surprising everyone in the room. The boy is left completely confused, not understanding his grandfather's reaction. Still laughing, the chairman remarks that his grandson wants to know his grand plan. Secretary Ju says he was thinking the same thing, and the grandfather agrees that the time has come. With a confident smile, the chairman says he is going to tell his grandson his plan. But he notes that he cannot do it right there, and that Chief Ju will be in touch. He invites him to go to the company so he can reveal everything he is planning. The family's reaction is immediate, and everyone turns to the boy's father with anger. He just asks what is going on while being glared at by everyone in the room. A man then stands up and, with a trembling voice, tries to get the chairman's attention. The grandfather yells furiously that he should not be called chairman, but grandfather. The man apologizes and says he also wants to know about the grand plan for the future. With clenched teeth, the grandfather reminds them that he has always told them something very important. He shouts that you only get a reward when you are willing to take the leap. The chairman points to his grandson and says he was the only one qualified to listen. The boy panics because he does not understand how everything is working out so well for him. In his room, he receives news of a meeting and wonders what the reason for it is. His assistant says he got a message to take him on the first Wednesday of the month. The young man is shocked to learn that the order came directly from the chairman himself. The grandfather's reply was that he would talk about the company's future at the management meeting. Knowing this, the young man decides he cannot stand still and needs to prepare for it. Without wasting time, the boy calls his assistant to give some important orders. He warns that the man is going to be swamped with work, and the assistant readily agrees. The young man asks for a report on all the subsidiaries and a summary of the past 10 years. The order is to focus on what worked and on the major issues for him to analyze. He knows he can relax at any other time, but right now he needs to be thorough. The young man remembers how he could not answer a simple question from his grandfather. That humiliating situation happened in front of Chairman Lee Won-bok in public. He then informs him that he needs everything ready by the end of the week at the latest. The assistant promises he will pull an all-nighter if needed to get everything ready. The boy says there is still one more task, and the man asks what else needs to be done. With a serious look, the young man starts explaining the second part of his grand plan. His assistant reveals he has already booked a venue and made the contacts for next Friday. He assures him the place is not overkill and asks if there are 231 freshmen. The boy confirms the number but is curious to know the reason for that question. Firmly, he orders the assistant to book the venue for all the students. The order is that absolutely every freshman at the university must be invited. The assistant is completely shocked by the request and shouts, unable to believe what he heard. He worries about the cost, but the young man says it is fine and not a problem. The boy explains that his goal is to turn every single one of them into his own people. The idea is to turn the university network into an organized force. The images show the entrance ceremony at Korea University in 1980. Several students take pictures with their families to celebrate the big special day. The campus is filled with students and their relatives celebrating the new phase of their lives. Meanwhile, the assistant and the young man try to gather the freshmen from 15 departments. The task of taking everyone from the university to the center of Gangnam was not easy at all. In his office, the assistant wonders if the young master will be able to pull off the plan. Renting the venue cost tens of millions, so the grandfather surely knew everything already. The boy smiles, knowing his grandfather will be disappointed when he sees the bill for that party. Outside, the welcome gifts are being handed out at the registration desk. The assistant notes that they are Sungin products, and it took courage to gift 6,000 freshmen. Seeing a classmate happy with his watch, the young man thinks he used all his saved money. He knows his grandfather will yell, saying it was a complete waste of money. But the boy smiles because, with the Sungin logo on everything, his grandfather cannot complain too much. Walking a bit, the young man asks assistant Lee if his parents have arrived at the venue yet. He also asks about the chairman, and the assistant says there was no message from him. The protagonist concludes his grandfather is too disappointed to come, which was exactly his plan. Inside a large auditorium, an announcement asks the students to gather in front of the stage. Assistant Lee says goodbye, saying he will wait outside until the ceremony is over. On stage, the master of ceremonies says that before they begin, there is an important announcement for everyone. He then reveals that to celebrate the new class, they invited a very special person. The audience starts wondering who it could be while the man asks for a round of applause. Sitting in the audience, the young man's eyes widen, completely surprised by what he sees. On stage, Chairman Hyun Byum Jun of the Sungin group introduces himself to the crowd. He says the reason he came is because his grandson Min Jun Ji will be studying with all of them. Shocked by the situation, the boy cannot believe his grandfather actually went there. The news of the chairman's speech at the university ceremony spreads through the papers. Reading the newspaper at home, the protagonist wonders what on earth is happening now. He does not understand his grandfather's reaction since he knew his grandson was wasting money. A memory of the chairman smiling at the party pops up, and the young man finds it very weird. The boy realizes something is not right and his calculations keep going totally wrong. A metaphor shows the protagonist riding a tiger, which is hard to get off once you get on. Looking at the large tiger, the young man concludes that this is exactly his current situation. His dream is to inherit a building, but the problem is that the building is the Sungin corporate headquarters. In a flashback, Assistant Lee knocks on the door and announces his arrival to the young man. Once inside the room, the assistant informs him that their tutoring sessions are over. He says the preparation was more than enough, and the young master will have no problems at school. The man, however, takes a short pause, making the boy curious about what will come next. With a serious look, the tutor advises him to be very careful because there are many monsters there. The young man thinks the monsters seemed cool at the ceremony, but they were just nerds with glasses and old books. The tutor explains that they are the best in the country, and they do not take studying lightly, just like him. At that, the protagonist's gaze shifts to a book on the table, and he asks what it is about. The tutor replies it is about semiconductor theory and wonders why the young man picked up the book. Sitting in his chair and with a calm smile, the boy begins to explain himself quietly. He reminds the tutor that he has been studying law lately, which the man immediately confirms. With an astute look, the boy says being in law school does not stop him from studying other things. The tutor is left speechless while the protagonist asks if he is not right about that. The young man reveals his plan to invite upperclassmen from other majors to teach him as well. The scene shifts, showing that the electronics market was divided between Zhenggang and Guzan. Sungin sales were very poor, and their rivals' growth was quite alarming. Soon the rivals surpassed Sungin in stores, which was a total humiliation for the company. If the chairman found out about this situation, it would definitely be the end for those responsible. That is why the day of the meeting with the chairman felt like Mr. Lim Do-won's farewell. Suddenly, the phone on his desk rings, giving the man a big scare from the noise. With trembling hands, the company president answers the call without knowing who it could be. On the other end of the line, assistant manager Lee Byum-sik introduces himself formally. Mr. Lim is confused while the manager asks to visit him to discuss a few requests. Sometime later, assistant Lee arrives at the office and introduces himself again to the president. The man invites him to sit and wonders what the subject of that visit could be. Wasting no time, the assistant places a green-covered book on the office desk. Manager Lee says it is a book on semiconductor theory, and Mr. Lim nods. Next, the visitor reveals he came to ask for a favor related to that book. He explains that young Master Sang Yoon wants to study the book and needs some help. The request is for him to find employees who can explain semiconductor theory well. Panicking, the president wonders if this is a way of telling him to take the vice chairman's side. He remembers that with the chairman aging, a succession battle has started between the sons. Behind the scenes, the company presidents compete to pick a side to support. Mr. Lim thinks that using the young master to make the request was a very safe approach. The scene returns to the protagonist when a man asks how he solved the 10th question. The young man looks confused by the question and says the problem was actually quite easy to solve. The man is surprised because not even the club's team managed to get the 10th question right. He then asks if the boy has been studying for a long time, but the answer is that it has only been a week. The revelation leaves the man open-mouthed, and he praises the boy, saying that is incredible. With a smile, the young man thinks it was no big deal and does not understand all the fuss. But the boy panics, imagining what would happen if his grandfather heard rumors about him being a genius. Meanwhile, President Lim congratulates him and notes that the young man is still there in the study room. The president takes the opportunity to say he has a question, and the boy tells him to go ahead. The man questions why he chose semiconductors when there are so many other profitable fields. With a confident smile, the protagonist answers with the words light, thin, short, and small. He explains that this means compact, light, and highly precise technology for the future. According to the boy, Korea grew with heavy industry, and the conglomerates followed that path. But he believes the industry needs to change, and semiconductor technology is the future. President Lim concludes that the young man believes the path to success lies in semiconductors. Another man present in the room just observes the conversation with a serious and thoughtful look. President Lim says the words are inspiring, but the 20-year technology gap is a problem. From the side, the young man hears the comment and agrees that President Lim has a good point. In his thoughts, the boy admits he said that as an excuse because closing that gap is impossible. President Lim says he understands his intentions and his care for the electronics company. Finishing the conversation, the young man makes one last request to keep everything a secret from the chairman. Soon after, in a meeting room, the executives wait around a long table. Arriving in the room, the young man bows and introduces himself, saying he will join that day's meeting. Before everyone, he says he hopes to work well with all those present in the room. The executives are shocked, wondering what that young man is doing at the monthly meeting. The boy's father stares at him with a serious look, saying absolutely no words at the moment. One of the older men approaches with a smile and asks if the young master remembers him. The boy recognizes him as President Go Mu-yel of Sungin Construction and confirms he remembers. The man says thank you and bows respectfully before the young man in front of all the others. He mentions that the university library will be ready next month so it will not disrupt his studies. With a big smile on his face, President Go Mu-yel celebrates the young man's presence at the meeting. President Go announces the chairman's entrance and asks everyone in the room to stand up. Immediately, all the older executives rise from their chairs as a sign of respect. The protagonist and his family members also stand, and the mood in the room gets even tenser. With an imposing presence, the company chairman enters and asks how everyone has been. Everyone bows in unison and answers that they are fine while the atmosphere becomes very intense. Sitting at the table, the young man gets ready to suggest semiconductors as the company's new business. He smirks, just imagining the shocked look on President Lim's face when he hears the suggestion. But the boy is confused to see that President Lim has an extremely satisfied look. At the head of the table, the boy's grandfather starts laughing loudly in a very scandalous way for everyone. He then calls Chief Ju, who promptly answers the call from his direct superior. The chairman asks if he heard what the young man said, and Chief Ju confirms that he did. Laughing hard, the grandfather comments on his grandson's boldness in suggesting semiconductors as a business. Soon after, the man calls Sang Yoon's name, and the young man answers his grandfather promptly. With a smile, his grandfather thanks him and says he spoke very well, leaving the boy in shock. The chairman then turns to the others and says that the boy's uncles and aunt are present there. And he goes on to say that none of the executives had the courage to say what he finally said. He says his grandson is right and that they cannot keep getting passed up by rivals. The man reveals he also believed entering the semiconductor field was the only way out. The boy is in shock to realize his grandfather was already planning to enter this field before. Understanding the situation, the protagonist turns his gaze toward President Lim at the table. He notices the man has a smug look and wonders internally what the reason for that is. Suddenly, one of the boy's uncles stands up, and the chairman asks if he has something to say. The man argues that the technology is too advanced and the initial cost will be astronomical. He adds that it is not just about Sungin, but about the survival of the entire group. With a furious look, the chairman tells him to keep talking, which leaves the man scared. The grandfather says every challenge has risks, and not taking a risk will lead them to a slow decline. In Singapore, a young man with an angry expression yells on the phone at someone. He is Hein Do-yoon and says the rookie is just showing off in front of the chairman. Elsewhere, a man recalls that the boy has already caused trouble and asks what they will do. On the phone, Hein Tae-yoon says the boy is his younger brother and is below him in the hierarchy. On the phone, Hein Do-yoon asks what he wants done, but the other says he should not talk like that. Tae-yoon says his older brother is the one who should discipline their cousin because he does not have much influence. The other reminds him he is the oldest grandson, but Do-yoon thinks his cousin does not even treat him with respect. Annoyed, the young man tells him to hang up because he needs to rest for a party later on. Tae-yoon advises him to hold back a bit, but the young man finds it funny hearing that from him. He then remembers that his cousin caused trouble with a girl and had to flee to Singapore. Extremely angry at the accusation, the young man hangs up the phone on his cousin without a second thought. Soon after, he gets up from bed and throws the device on the floor with all his might. Then the boy goes to the window and watches the rainy street outside with a look of contempt. He complains, saying he is sick of that place and that he should have gone to America too. Lying in bed, the young man resigns himself because he knows no university there would accept him anyway. A memory of the phone call comes back to his mind with his cousin saying Yoon is showing off. Thinking about the situation, Do-yoon admits to himself that his cousin has been acting weird. He was average in high school but out of nowhere got into law and won all his grandfather's praise. Plus he had the audacity to ask for a whole library as a gift and their grandfather obliged. The young man wonders if that is really the grandfather he knows, because he never got gifts like that. He remembers asking for just a bungalow with a terrace or a single sports car. However, he never got a gift of that sort from his grandfather, even being the oldest grandson. When he returned to Korea, his own father scolded him for making demands without studying properly. Back in the present, the protagonist's tutor is silent, shocked by what he just heard. The boy smiles and thinks to himself, just to keep the tutor doubting his choices. With a determined look, he expects his behavior to be reported to the boss immediately. After all, medical school is for doctors and engineering school is for engineers to pursue. Following the same logic, law school is for training legal professionals. So a law student studying engineering is something completely devoid of any apparent sense. He believes that when his absurd behavior is reported to the chairman in a newspaper, the good impression his grandfather had at the entrance ceremony will be totally undone in seconds. Noticing the intent behind all that, the tutor calls out to the young master, very shocked. The tutor says he finally understands the plan, and the boy asks what exactly he understood. He explains he did not understand why the young man talked about friends and not the board meeting. But he says he discovered that the chairman was very happy with the speech at the ceremony. The protagonist does not understand a thing and wonders what grand plan the tutor is talking about. The man says the plan is to be first in law and in other departments too, to impress the grandfather. With a determined look and a sinister smile, the tutor says he will prepare everything for him. The boy asks what he is going to prepare, and the answer is that the best experts will be his tutors. Leaving the room, the man promises he will get a semiconductor tutor no matter what happens. That way, he can understand everything about the subject before the group's next monthly meeting. Speechless and totally in shock, the young man stands still, not knowing what to say or how to react. He then realizes that thanks to Manager Lee, he will have to study hard until dawn. In his office, Assistant Manager Lee Byung-sik works focused at his office desk. The image shows the work environment with several cubicles and him sitting, concentrating on his tasks. Looking through a list, he wonders where the person he needs to find so badly is. He thinks that since he started serving the young master, every day is full of surprises. Looking at the large company building, he begins to recall his own journey in there. The man remembers that even before joining the company, he was already someone very ambitious. He graduated from university, gave up on the bar exam, and joined the company to reach the top. To achieve his big goal, he worked as if days had 48 hours. In his second year, he was already known, and in his third, he joined the company's secretariat. It was around that time he met Chief Ju, the person closest to the great chairman of Sungyeon. The chief said he had heard a lot about him and was looking forward to them working together. With a smile, he remembers he was on a path of flowers and promised to give his best. But he did not expect his promising career to be completely shattered by a single order. Shocked, he remembers the moment Chief Ju assigned him to look after young Master Sang, Yoon. Chief Ju said he was the perfect person for the job and that he was counting heavily on him. The request was for him to take care of the vice chairman's third son, young Hyun Sang, Yoon. He thinks that if it were not for the chairman, he would have found a way to escape that task. His great frustration was having to look after someone who was so far down the line of succession. He wondered if he had lost the favor of his superiors but soon discovered he was wrong. Upon realizing the young master's true value, his doubts simply vanished completely. He proved his ability by getting into law school, showing his great potential. The tutor believes the young man will inherit the chairman position and run the entire Sungyeon company. At his work desk, he looks at a picture frame with a photo of him next to the young master. With a confident smile, Lee Byung-sik promises to dedicate his entire being to the boy's succession. The scene shifts back to the past with the manager making a call to President Lim Do-1. He introduces himself as Assistant Manager Lee Byung-sik from the Sungyeon Group Secretariat. Outside the company building, he asks the president if he has time to talk. On the phone, President Lim Do-1 is quite surprised by the request for a meeting today. The scene shows the president thinking that if the vice chairman loses the succession, he has an excuse. But if Hyun Deok-jae becomes the next chairman, this help could be a salvation in the company. Looking at the semiconductor book, he decides he needs to seize this chance right now. With that, he tells the manager he will find the right people to help the young master. The scene returns to the present with the protagonist waking up in his bed at 4:30 in the morning. Right after, the boy goes out to the street and begins his routine of 30 minutes of morning exercise. As soon as the workout ends, the young man sits down with a coffee to carefully read the daily newspaper. This is a routine he keeps every single day without fail since he was in middle school. A question pops into his mind about why he tries so hard in everything he does. With a determined look, the protagonist seems to find the answer to his own question. The image of his grandfather with a terrifying look comes to his mind as a huge motivation. He just needs to pretend to be a model citizen until he gets a building to live off the rent. At that moment, assistant manager Lee arrives, and the young master asks him to come into the room. The manager walks in super excited, saying good morning, and the boy replies much more calmly. The tutor rushes him so they won't be late, and the young man wonders why he is so energetic. The scene then shows Sungain Electronics headquarters too, where they were going to have the meeting. Arriving there, President Lim welcomes them with an exaggerated bow, bidding them welcome. The protagonist is surprised by the reception and asks the president what he is doing there. He says he gathered some employees to help with his semiconductor studies. President Lim says he will stay just for a moment and asks the others to introduce themselves to the young man. Manager So Bong-hwa introduces himself as a senior member of the study group and bows. Next, another man introduces himself as Manager Go Hak Jun from the management department. Finally, a woman and a man introduce themselves as a manager and an employee from other departments. The young man then introduces himself to the group and says it is a pleasure to meet everyone there. Soon after, the boy reveals that before they begin, he has a small favor to ask everyone. He says he is there to learn and asks to be treated like an ordinary student without pressure. President Lim agrees with a smile but almost calls him young master without realizing it. With a serious look, the protagonist says the title of young master also makes him uncomfortable. He then politely asks everyone to just call him saying, "You," to make things easier. President Lim loves the idea and Manager Lee thinks about how eager the young master is to learn. Manager So starts the first lesson and corrects himself mid-sentence to call him Sang Yoon. He explains that to gauge the boy's knowledge level, they will start with a simple test. To keep him from feeling uncomfortable, all the other employees will also take the test. The manager says there are 10 questions with a 30-minute time limit for everyone. With everything ready, he gives the signal for everyone to begin the test, and the young man takes his sheet. Upon reading the questions, the boy's eyes widen as he realizes something very unexpected about the test. The questions are extremely difficult, but the young man wonders why it all seems so easy. He thinks that if he had known this, he would have studied less, and now he wonders what he should do. With a determined look, the boy decides he just needs to get an average score. Just like in the aptitude test, he will purposely get a few wrong to look like an average student. Time is up, and Manager So stands up to announce the results for all participants. He says he will begin announcing the scores, starting with the lowest score among all of them. Manager Lee admits he didn't understand a thing, and the instructor says it's normal since it's not his field. In first place was Manager Go with 90 points, which makes him quite satisfied. Manager Cho and employee Kim were right behind with a score of 80 points. With a small smile on his face, the instructor pauses before announcing the final result. He then reveals that Sang Yoon achieved a score of 70 points on his initial test. Everyone congratulates him on the good result for his first time, and the young man thanks everyone. The boy notices the weird expression on President Lim's face, who cheers enthusiastically. With an evil smile, he thinks this was exactly the reaction he so badly wanted to see. The young man celebrates that his effort paid off, but the instructor calls him with a confused expression. With a shocked face, Manager So calls out to the boy, who asks what the problem is now. He points to the last question and says it has a fail rate of over 90% in college. The instructor is in shock and asks how he managed to solve such a complex question. A memory of President Lim laughing and promising to take the secret to the grave pops into his mind. In the grandfather's room, Chief Ju says the young man asked to keep everything a secret that day. The chairman then dismisses him, and the man bows deeply, wishing his boss a good day. Right after the man leaves the room, Chief Ju closes the door, leaving the chairman alone. As soon as the door closes, the Sungyun chairman begins to laugh out loud. He says his grandson studies for the company and not just for school, which Chief Ju agrees with. The grandfather finds it curious that he got the easy ones wrong and the hard one right, but his assistant says it is a coincidence. Turning his back, the man says he could think that way if it were anyone else. With a firm step, he states that with his grandson, the story is completely different. He says the boy does not rely on luck and that his talent might fool others, but not him. With a satisfied smile, the chairman begins talking about the group's next monthly meeting. He suggests that young Sang Yoon attend and say a few words, leaving his chief surprised. The assistant asks if he is serious, and the man confirms, already looking forward to the moment. With a wide smile, the grandfather can hardly wait to see what his grandson will say to shake things up. Elsewhere, an old alarm clock starts ringing very loudly in the protagonist's room. With a quick movement, the boy turns off the noise so he can start another day of his routine. The young man stretches in bed and thinks that today's schedule will be even tighter. Already dressed to go, Manager Lee greets him with a super upbeat and energetic good morning. Inside the car, the boy reads the paper and thinks about his packed day with studies and the monthly meeting. As they travel down the highway, he remembers asking Manager Lee to change his schedule. They arrive at a warehouse, and the group wonders why they are meeting in such a place. The protagonist and his manager enter the location to find out what is going on inside. As they walk through the door, both are completely shocked by what they see indoors. The place that looked like an old warehouse was actually very luxurious and well decorated inside. A man calls out to them, and manager Lee says he will wait outside while he goes in. The boy asks if he is reporter Won Dong-shik, and the man confirms, inviting him to sit. The reporter starts addressing him formally, but the young man asks him to just call him Sang-yoon. The journalist asks the reason he suddenly accepted the interview request. The man says that when a rich family meets with a reporter, it is for one of two reasons: either to promote themselves or to hide something they do not want the public to know. The boy insists he is there just to talk about his studies because he is only a college student. The reporter reminds him he is also a young master of a very rich and powerful family. He says people want a story about a smart, rich young man, and not just about studies. Sipping his coffee, the protagonist agrees the reporter is not wrong in his analysis. He knows that if he were not from the family he would not be there, nor giving an interview. The journalist notices a book on the table, and the young man confirms he is a law student like he knew. The boy shows the book and explains it is material on semiconductor theory. His plan was to show the reporter which book he was studying so it would make the news. When the article gets published, it will signal that Sung-yin is entering the semiconductor business. He knows that leaking this information on his own will hurt his standing within the family. Although it seems risky, he believes that if he is accused of leaking a company's secret, he can simply play dumb and say he has no influence over the group's strategies. The reporter asks if he can treat that as an official statement, and the young man agrees. The man warns him he might regret this, but the young man does not seem fazed by it. The journalist insists the news will spread, and the protagonist says he knows and does not care. The boy reveals that if he were not a reporter, he would not even have met with him to begin with. The journalist is quiet for a moment, surprised by the young man's attitude in front of him. With a smile, he admits he did not expect much, that the boy is more interesting than he thought. The man realizes the young man is not just there for a simple interview about college. Both realize they want something from each other, and the reporter asks what the plan is. The plan is simple: one provides the scoop, and the other writes the article he wants. With a smile on his face, the protagonist holds out his hand and asks what he thinks of the deal. The reporter thinks for a moment with his eyes closed before making his final decision. He accepts the deal and shakes the young man's hand, who congratulates him on his wise choice. The man says having a reporter by his side will be of great help for his future plans. The scene changes, showing the imposing Sunghan Group building on a sunny and busy day. Several black cars and executives are at the building's entrance waiting for the meeting to begin. Arriving at the meeting room door, the protagonist gets ready for the most awaited moment. With his hand on the doorknob, he knows that every word spoken there will have a major impact on his future. The young man thinks there are two paths ahead for his future at that decisive moment. Either he inherits some buildings in Gangnam and lives peacefully forever without any worries. The assessment of Chairman Hyun Byung-jin, who watches his every move, is what matters most. This assessment will decide not only the meeting's outcome but also his entire future. With an evil smile on his face, he thinks he must never become the company chairman. Meanwhile, in the meeting, the chairman cleans his glasses in silence, and the mood gets tense. The other company executives wait anxiously in total silence for the conversation to start. Suddenly, the chairman calls out the name Go-mu Yell loudly, startling the man. Promptly, the executive stands up and answers his boss's call very attentively. The boss questions how his contract performance improved so much this year compared to the last. The man explains they found a new business opportunity in another sector. With a very serious look, the company chairman asks exactly how that happened. He reveals that the university library contract increased requests from other colleges. The chairman then asks if, by doing that, he ended up straying from the company's main path. The executive replies that the path does not matter much as long as they reach Seoul. The boss says he reached Gyeonggi, which is a good start, but it is still not ideal. He then orders the man to work even harder to manage to reach Seoul this year. Bowing exaggeratedly, the executive says he will remember that and will try harder. Soon after, the chairman calls the next on the list, who gets scared by the sudden call. He questions the progress of the Middle East project, and the man hesitates to answer. With a face sweating from nerves, the man apologizes to the company chairman in front of everyone. He guarantees that in a month at most, he will have a result that will certainly please him greatly. But the boss's trust is useless, and what he really needs are concrete results. The executive is left speechless and with a look of pure tension on his face after the harsh reply. The chairman then warns everyone present that he does not believe in any kind of trust. He states if something cannot be seen and proven, then it simply does not exist to him. Next, he orders that next time, everyone bring results that are visible and clear. Changing the subject, the chairman starts talking about the results of the group's chemical sector. He asks another executive if he has any results to show, and the man gets scared. The man also apologizes and promises that by the next meeting he will have something to present. Yelling with all his might, the chairman complains about the company's department store. A female executive tries to justify it by saying it is not just their store that is having problems right now. She explains that sales fell because of new laws, but the chairman yells at her to call him boss. After hearing the yell, the woman is completely terrified and starts sweating cold with nerves. When intimidated, the boss slams the table and asks what is wrong with everyone's mindset. Putting the subject aside, he mentions the name of the group's electronics company. Next, he calls Mr. Lim Do-won, who stands up and promptly responds to the call. The chairman says he hopes not to be disappointed by him either, and the man looks at him in fear. The young man remembers that the vice chairman's youngest son graduated in law and joined the company. And now the same young man is showing up at today's meeting, which leaves him deep in thought. He then understands that a big game for the company's succession is about to begin. Noticing the boss's intent, he interrupts him and says he has something urgent to discuss. The chairman, with his serious and imposing look, simply allows the man to keep talking. The executive then reveals that the chairman's grandson, Hyun Sang-yoon, is also present at the meeting. He says the boy has been going to the company and studying with the employees, which surprises him. With a terrifying calmness, the boss says he already knows that but asks why it matters. Mr. Lim suggests that the young master also has something to say about the electronics company. The chairman, sitting in his chair, agrees with the suggestion and tells them to proceed. With a malicious smile on his face, the boss calls out his grandson's name, Hyun Sang-yoon. The young man stands up from his chair and answers that he hears his grandfather's call. The boss says he has many questions but will be brief and asks his grandson to speak his mind. He then asks the boy what he discovered during his visits to the electronics company. Sang-yoon says he heard they are looking for a new business sector, and the boss asks what else. The boy then suggests the company should invest in the semiconductor field as a new business. Everyone in the meeting room is shocked by the suggestion and wonders the reason for it. The protagonist thinks to himself that this surprised reaction was exactly what he wanted. He feels satisfied seeing the look of astonishment on President Lim's face at his suggestion. But the very next moment, the young man becomes totally confused by what just happened. He wonders why President Lim has such a big and satisfied smile on his face. Another executive stands up and yells that such an impossible challenge will ruin the group's future. The chairman then yells back, asking how he knows it is impossible without even trying. Completely shocked by the scolding, the executive can only manage to cry out the word father. The boss says he heard his nephew studied with the team to gain extensive knowledge. The protagonist is totally confused by the situation and wonders what is going on. The chairman then questions why the man only thinks about failing instead of surviving. He says a young law student is trying and asks if the executive has no shame. The boss asks if he has anything else to say, but the man replies he does not. Then the chairman looks at the other executives and asks what everyone's opinion is. He questions if anyone else wants to stop the company from becoming the best company in the nation. With the question hanging in the air, everyone in the meeting room remains in absolute silence. Seeing that no one spoke up, the chairman declares the meeting over and thanks everyone. Next, everyone stands up and in a single voice thanks the boss for his dedicated time. As everyone is leaving, the chairman calls for Sang-yoon, who responds promptly. With a smile on his face, the grandfather invites his grandson to dinner because they have a lot to discuss. The boy agrees to the invitation and says he fully understood what was requested. Meanwhile, the executive who got scolded looks back with a look of pure rage. Later that night, in front of a luxury building, the chairman makes an offer to his grandson. Once inside the place, the two are seated and the young man asks what he needs to choose. The boss then tells the boy to pick between the United States or Japan as a partner. The young man is confused by the sudden question and says he cannot understand the reason. In his thoughts, he understands that his grandfather wants him to choose which country to get the technology from. That is because only those two countries have mass production of integrated circuits. The boy questions why he has to choose since he is not an executive, and his grandfather tells him to stop. The chairman yells that he already heard everything, and the startled boy asks what he heard. He reveals that Chief Ju told him everything about the meetings with the reporter before the meeting. The protagonist realizes it was all just a big setup planned by his grandfather. He gets emotional thinking his grandfather supported him at the meeting because he completely trusted him. But the boy soon realizes that is not the case at all and gets desperate at the truth. He remembers an executive saying his grandfather should discipline a grandson who talks too much. At that moment, he notices his grandfather's serious look and gets tense about what might happen. The grandfather asks if the young man has thought enough, and the boy wonders why he looks so hopeful. With a confident smile, the chairman says he must choose now because there are no other options. The scene then shifts to a luxurious house at night, showing the dinner is finally over. Inside, a man with glasses sits on a white couch quietly reading a book. He thinks about his son who went to dine with the grandfather and wonders if the boy is doing well. His memories take him back to the boy's first meeting and how the crowd was very critical. He regrets not being there, but the order was that the group's control tower must always be guarded. But that day he really wanted to leave his post because that is how a father feels. He then remembers a boss's words saying his son proposed semiconductors. Thinking his son's goal was always this, he is interrupted by the boy who just arrived. The father asks if dinner with his grandfather was good, and the young man nods while being invited to sit. Already sitting next to his father, he is asked about bringing up semiconductors, and the young man confirms. The man asks if it is true he used the media, and the son says it wasn't intentional but it happened. The boy then reveals the chairman wants him to take a leave from school, and his father is amazed. He explains the plan is to send him for training at a company in the United States or Japan. After hearing it all, the father simply asks his son if he has made a decision on what to do. With a firm look and a slight smile on his face, the protagonist replies yes, he has decided. He remembers the moment he told his grandfather he would go to the United States to study. Returning to the present, the boy informs his father that his choice was the United States. Next, he asks if his father has already had dinner, and the man replies quickly that he has. The young man insists on the question, but his father gets annoyed and tells him to go up to his room immediately. Not understanding the reaction, the boy agrees to go up first and wishes his father a good night. As he walks away, he looks back and wonders if his father waited for him without eating. Alone in the living room, the boy's father breaks into a discreet smile, showing his pride in his son. Elsewhere, a young man with long hair complains that everyone only cares about his cousin. He feels wronged and does not understand why his father, who is also the oldest son, does not understand him. Lying in his bed with clothes scattered around the room, he complains about how awful the world is. With an angry look, he thinks that kid is definitely up to something. But right after, he gives up caring about it while a broken phone is shown. The next morning in front of the large company building, a voice wishes Sang Yuna good morning. Once in the office, he is greeted by President Lim and replies to the good morning greeting. The boss shows that their club now has an official name as the Semiconductor Task Force. Everyone has become an official member, and the protagonist was added to the team as a trainee. With everyone gathered in a meeting room, the manager asks everyone to sit. The boy thinks they might call him a nepotist, but he does not care because it is all part of his plan. He believes this situation is an opportunity to lower everyone's expectations of him. One of the managers suggests starting by looking for companies that could transfer technology to them. The team starts discussing options, but the first suggestions are discarded because they already have partners. A man despairs at the suggestion of approaching the world's largest computer manufacturer. A female executive explains that this company is not accepting partners after an espionage scandal. She concludes they will not accept any Asian company, and the boy who suggested it gets embarrassed. The protagonist gets annoyed because he wants to be the one to give that bad suggestion, but is interrupted. Seeing his reaction, one of the managers invites him to share his ideas with the rest of the group. Another team member mocks the previous idea and encourages the young man to give a better suggestion. The boy thinks he needs to give the most ridiculous and incorrect answer he can imagine. He begins by saying the mentioned companies focus on production and not technology research. A manager agrees with the statement, and the boy continues saying their competitors did the same. With a confident smile on his face, the protagonist then suggests they do the exact opposite. The manager is confused by the suggestion and asks the young man what he means by the opposite. The boy suggests approaching the laboratory that developed the foundation of semiconductors for a partnership. He argues that while production is important, the original technology is much more valuable. He asks for everyone's opinion while thinking his idea is obviously complete nonsense. His team members start laughing and say that although he is ambitious, he went too far. The manager smiles awkwardly and says the young man's idea will unfortunately be a bit difficult. But suddenly, everyone's reaction changes, and they start enthusiastically applauding the idea. The manager gets super excited and says this is what was expected of Mr. Sang Yoon. The team president says he feels secure with the boy in that role, and he starts to get worried. With a big smile, the president tells him to do exactly what the young master suggested. At that moment, everyone in the room starts celebrating and shouting Sang Yoon's name in support. The boy is completely shocked and realizes they are sending him to do it all by himself. An emotional manager praises the boy's next-level vision for being the chairman's grandson. While thanking the compliment, the young man panics and thinks he needs to say it was a joke. Desperate at the table with his hands on his head, the boy is called by one of the team's managers. The colleague gives a thumbs up with both hands and says everything will work out perfectly. A woman sitting at the table says she is impressed with the idea and asks the reason for it. The manager then explains that the researcher who invented their technology is Korean. He deduces the boy's plan is to get the technology directly from the inventor, and the boy freaks out. Raising his hand to interrupt the conversation, the protagonist says he also wants to ask something. President Lim questions if the competitors would not have tried contacting him before them. The other manager nods thoughtfully and says there must be a reason they have not tried. Punching the air, the boy stands up and says that was exactly the point he wanted to raise. But one of the managers gives a half smile and says that will not be a problem at all. He claims to be certain the young man has already considered that fact in his plan, and the boy is shocked. President Lim says they should trust and follow the boy's lead because he believes in him. With that, everyone in the room starts clapping and cheering while the young man despairs. He realizes that now, not only is he going to the United States, but he will also have to do business. But then a new idea pops into his mind, and he wonders why he did not think of it earlier. The boy understands he can simply go there and fail the mission to recruit the doctor. Standing up from his chair with confidence, he says that since everyone trusts him so much, the boy promises he will make it happen, thinking the disappointment will be greater because of the expectation. One of the managers cries with emotion and shouts he knew he could count on the young master. Smiling, he thinks about turning a crisis into an opportunity and asks for the support of his seniors. The scene then takes us to a house in New Jersey in the United States at night. A man on the phone says he will not accept an agreement without a guarantee for scientific research. He then says goodbye to the person on the line and hangs up the rotary phone with a click. This is Dr. Chu Young-dae, who complains that large companies always say the same thing. He remembers he received offers from his home country with proposals for high positions in stocks, but his only question for them was about the budget and the team for basic research. The answer he got was that mass production was more urgent than research at the moment. He regrets that nobody said what he wanted to hear while standing in a Korean airport. He laments the situation because he really wanted to do the right thing if it were possible for him. In his thoughts, he believes that basic research is the cornerstone of everything. For him, this foundation needs to be strong, because only then will it be possible to look to the future. At that, he remembers that the semiconductor company GTC was very clear in its proposal. The company offered a director position at a laboratory with $1 billion budget. But the problem is that it is a Japanese company, which makes him hesitate to accept. He wished a Korean company would make a better offer when his phone rings. The doctor answers thinking it is just another call, but the person asks for David Cho. On the other side of the line, Sang-yoon introduces himself as a member of the Sungyeon task force. Before the boy could continue, the doctor yells he is not interested in the proposal. After the unexpected response, an awkward silence takes over the call between the two. The boy asks if he is sure, and the scientist reaffirms he is not the least bit interested. Sang-yoon then says he understands and says goodbye, leaving the doctor shocked by the reaction. The scientist sits in his armchair totally confused by what just happened. Changing the scene, the protagonist discovers his midterm exams have arrived. A classmate greets him with a lot of energy and tells him good luck on today's test. Next, the classmate hands over a notebook, and the boy asks what that is. The man says it is a study guide he spent all night preparing for the young man. He promises that with the boy's skills, being top of the class will be very easy. The protagonist then walks into the college to take his first exam since he started. While walking, he thinks he needs to get a good grade since it is his first test. But by good grade, he means just enough not to get expelled, and he needs to fail precisely. He remembers that the day before he took a practice test with assistant manager Lee. In the next scene, he asks his classmate what his total score on the practice test was. With eyes shining with excitement, the man starts saying the score was 90. He shouts that it was 95 points, and that the boy missed only a single question. The colleague says the score was amazing because he even included very advanced questions. The young man missed question 9 on purpose, but the man didn't even suspect a thing, and he wonders why. Looking at the test, he thinks that on tomorrow's exam he needs to get all the hard questions wrong. If he does that, he imagines his grandfather yelling and kicking him out of the company forever. Seeing the young master's reaction, assistant manager Lee gets worried and calls him. The man with glasses asks in a startled way what happened, and the protagonist calls him by name. The boy asks him to find a herbal clinic and order a traditional medicine. Confused by the sudden request, the manager wonders why he is asking for this now. The young man then orders him to buy enough boxes for the entire freshman class. With an evil smile, he says he just wants to help his classmates do well on the exam. While the boy hangs up the phone, one of his managers approaches super excited. The young man simply says the doctor is not interested, and the manager gets confused. With his hand on his forehead, the protagonist sighs and says unfortunately his attempt did not work. He apologizes to the team and says it was all due to his lack of skill. A female team member suggests he go to the United States to meet in person. Another team member encourages him, saying everyone believes he can do it. Manager So agrees and says he just needs one more chance to try again. The boy glares at him angrily and asks if they didn't agree to leave it all to him. The manager scratches his head awkwardly but still suggests calling the doctor one more time. The protagonist then asks in an intimidating way if the manager really trusts him. He argues that calling too much could pressure the doctor and that haste makes waste. The manager agrees and says the team will keep monitoring the scientist's situation. With an evil smile, the boy thinks he had no intention of making it work from the start. He knows if he wanted to save the project, he would have gone to the United States to recruit the doctor. But instead, he was just polite enough to get rejected in a single phone call. His only goal since the beginning of this whole crazy project was just one of failure. Meanwhile, Dr. Cho holds the phone and wonders what that call was about. The scientist is shocked by what just happened and cannot believe what he heard. With wide eyes, he thinks he should be angry about the situation, but he is not. He remembers how Korean companies always hesitated when talking about real research. But this young man was different and hung up at the first refusal, which left him very intrigued. He wonders if all that confidence is due to a more American business style. Interested, he decides he needs to research more about this company called Sungyeon. A few days later, the scene returns to the Semiconductor Task Force office. At his office desk, the protagonist is focused on his work when he is interrupted. Manager So comes running in and shouting for the young master, startling everyone there. The boy scolds him for not calling him an associate and asks what happened that was so urgent. Grinning from ear to ear, the manager says he has great news to share. The protagonist is surprised and wonders what kind of great news he could possibly have. He thinks to himself that if the news is really good, then something went very wrong. Other team members approach and say they just received word from the doctor. The news is that the scientist is interested in signing a contract with their company. The boy is in shock and cannot believe the task force actually succeeded. Everyone in the room starts celebrating and saying it was all thanks to the associate's achievement. One of them says the young man is the future of the team and that he is everyone's hope. Another super excited colleague shouts he always believed the boy could achieve such a feat. With tears in his eyes, manager So says the young master worked very hard for this. In a panic, the protagonist wonders why the doctor would come if he never invited him. The manager then reveals the scientist requested some very demanding conditions to accept. The first condition is that the company establish a semiconductor research institute. The manager says the second condition might be a bit too much, and the boy tells him to speak up. He wants an annual research budget of $5 million for 10 years, which shocks the manager. The man turns to the surprised protagonist, but he just says that is perfect. With a smirk, the young man says he will accept the conditions and take the responsibility. He thinks he cannot believe things are working out so well for his plan to go bankrupt. He sees this as a golden opportunity to lose $50 million over 10 years. Elsewhere, a rival company's president gets angry upon hearing the doctor is going to Sungyeon. The vice president says it is not finalized yet and still needs the boss's approval. President Park Byung-shik asks if they can still bring the doctor in but receives a negative answer. Angrily, he stands up and yells that this means the scientist is really going to their rival. He asks about Vikram, but the answer is they demand huge royalty payments. The president gets frustrated with the situation and does not know what to do to solve the problem. He regrets not being able to build a Korean company with the doctor because of the shareholders. He then wonders how Sung-ayan managed to convince the scientist to join them. The man reveals the person leading the recruitment was the Sung-ayan vice chairman's youngest son. The president asks who Hyan Sang-yoon is, and the man reminds him of the grandson the rival bragged about. He remembers the boy and is surprised to learn he is already working at the company. The vice president says the boy is very well regarded at school and the company at the same time. In disbelief, the president wonders how that little kid managed to get Dr. Cho. With his hands on his head, he calls the vice president, who responds promptly to the call. The boss asks about his son Jae-il, and the man confirms he got into college. Next, the president grabs the doctor's papers and tears them up, saying Jae-il can do it too. He then orders his vice president to arrange a position for his son in the company as well. The man promises his son will do well, and the boss tells him to give him a title and let him try. With a serious look, the president thinks he will need to remember the name Hyan Sang-yoon. Back in the office, the assistant manager has a vision and shouts that his eyes cannot take it. He sees the protagonist as an angel with white wings reaching out to a group of people. On his knees, the manager understands the boy is using the medicine to win over his colleagues. The young master gets embarrassed, and the manager praises him as the light of the world and the future of the group. The man then salutes and says he will search for the best medical clinics in the country. With the manager rushing off, the boy is left alone at his desk with the practice test papers. The scene then shows several students in the library studying while taking the boy's medicine. Everyone in the study room is focused and enjoying the tonic's effect to study. Time passes and test day finally arrives for all the students at the university. In a large classroom, the professor asks if everyone is present, and the class confirms. The man then announces he will hand out the tests and that the exam will begin immediately. A proctor hands out the sheets and asks everyone to put away everything except writing materials. With a malicious smile, the boy thinks his plan to get the hard questions wrong is perfect. But upon receiving the test sheet, he is completely shocked by the questions he sees. He starts to sweat cold and realizes the situation is very bad for his plan to fail. With his pen in hand, he realizes the test is much harder than he expected. But actually, the test is so easy that it is very difficult to manage to get the questions wrong. He realizes the answers are too obvious and he cannot get them wrong even if he tries. But suddenly he has a new idea and realizes he can simply not answer the questions. He decides to ignore the multiple choice questions out of fear of getting them right out of pure natural instinct. While the professor collects the papers, the boy smiles, planning to focus only on the essay to fake a lack of time. Writing non-stop, the young man thinks he is a true genius for coming up with that foolproof plan to get a low grade. A week passes and the university president reaches out asking for a meeting with the protagonist's grandfather. Soon after, the old man's assistant lets him know that the topic of that urgent meeting is exactly his grandson. Smiling confidently, the gray-haired man deduces it must be great news about the boy. With that, the grandfather finds the situation amusing, imagining the in-person chat will be like a parent-teacher meeting. At that moment, the rich man's secretary asks what should be done about that sudden invitation. Wasting no time, the man orders a dinner set up with the director and a nice gift prepared to please the guest. Far away, the young man checks his report card and realizes his grades fell strictly within the class average. With a 0 score on the multiple choice and full marks on the essay, he hopes his grandfather will finally give up on him. Later, the two old men meet in a private room to drink and discuss the student's performance. Sweating cold, the president reveals the boy did not answer the initial questions and embarrassed himself on the test. Holding a small glass, the old man states it is his grandson's own lack of skill and feels ashamed. In this context, the rich man asks that the boy simply graduate safely so he can get a small building in the future. Meanwhile, the phone rings in the boy's room, and he figures everyone must be extremely disappointed. Soon, tension takes over the protagonist's face as he notices the call is from his feared relative. Answering the call, the old man reports having talked with the director and confesses he is deeply disappointed with the test. Hearing that, the student breaks into a huge smile of happiness and celebrates the apparent victory of his crazy plan. Bathed in dramatic lighting, the boy celebrates internally for finally hearing words of rejection from his family member. Faking sadness, he covers his face and apologizes while the old man yells furiously on the other end of the line. Smiling subtly, the young man says he has no excuses and claims he does not deserve the position he currently holds. Right after, the grandfather tells the grandson to be quiet and says the university director told him all the details. The mood gets even heavier when the old man reveals the test answers were far beyond the level of a freshman. Shocked by the revelation, the boy holds his own head upon finding out he was called a rare talent in the legal world. Sweating in despair, the protagonist does not understand the situation while his relative asks when he had time to study. Completely frozen and unable to react, the boy stutters on the phone trying to find some excuse for that mess. With wide eyes, the grandfather yells at the top of his lungs, assuring he will never let his grandson pursue a career in law. Faced with this, the young man's world shatters like broken glass upon hearing he will be forced to take over the company for good. Falling to his knees on the floor, the boy cries comically, lamenting the failure of his dream of just getting a building. Regaining his posture, the young man denies finding the semiconductor project boring and assures he is not forcing himself to please him. On the other end of the line, the old man questions if the boy planned to leave that old guy running the company totally alone. Through tears, the boy explains he has zero interest in becoming a prosecutor or judge like his relative was imagining. Pleased with the answer, the rich man praises the attitude of focusing on the essay just to protect the family's pride on the exam. Not understanding anything, the student hears that the college director thought he left the questions blank out of pure kindness. Laughing hard, the gentleman with glasses confesses he was dying of embarrassment, seeing how happy that man was with the situation. Downing a glass of liquor, the company leader states angrily that he would never let his own grandson become a hero of justice. Overflowing with fury in his eyes, the older man decrees that the boy will stay in the family business with no exceptions. Clenching his teeth, he demands total obedience and tells the boy never again to do things that make him look like a fool. Crying buckets, the protagonist promises to keep that in mind while the old man nods satisfied with that submissive answer. Being released from the tense call, the young man wishes his grandfather a quiet day and finally hangs up the phone with deep sadness. With that, a heavy silence fills the room, and the boy stands still staring at the phone with a feeling of total defeat. Letting out a long sigh of exhaustion, the student lowers his head as he looks again at that disastrous report card on the desk. He concludes the result of that test, where he only answered the written part, was a completely absurd catastrophe. Instead of disappointing everyone, he feels he ended up becoming the perfect prey for the big shots controlling his future. Drawing a big red X over man's resume, the young man accepts that his operation to sabotage the exams failed. With a serious expression, the boy focuses on the photo of that mustached employee and decides he will need to find another way. Days later, the failed tests are forgotten, and the inauguration ceremony for the new library happens without a hitch. Wearing academic robes, the old man smiles as he receives an honorary doctorate from the university for donating student scholarships. The big problem arises when crazy rumors spread around campus saying the protagonist is a genius at essays. Confused by the gossip, one of the students with glasses wonders why someone so smart would skip the multiple-choice questions. Knowing nothing, the class concludes the young man left the test blanks so he would not steal scholarship spots from the poorer students. Being treated like a true divine saint, the Heir realizes the misunderstandings have totally spiraled out of his control. Walking through college, the boy sweats cold noticing his classmates admiring him as if he were an untouchable deity. Making things worse, the teachers and even the director start looking at the boy with an affection that leaves him feeling very suffocated. Holding his relative's valuable honorary diploma, the college student regrets falling for that cunning chairman's scheme. Determined to ignore this tense campus atmosphere, he focuses on the marked calendar and gets ready for tomorrow's big event. The next morning, the sun shines bright in the blue sky while a large commercial airplane flies over the international airport. Inside the busy concourse, several passengers walk with their luggage after arriving on a long international flight. Waiting near the exit, the young man and his secretary hold a welcome sign to pick up a mysterious guest. Still waiting at the airport, the assistant looks aside and asks permission to ask the young man a small question. With a tone of concern, the employee questions if that schedule isn't too tight for the newly arrived guest. The man with glasses suggests letting the doctor rest at the hotel today because of the long flight time to the country. Denying the idea, the boy argues the guest has already had enough time to relax on the plane and needs to get to work. Closing his eyes, the protagonist states the expert is a very valuable visitor and must be put to good use. To ensure the visit's failure, the Heir prepared a packed schedule before the man even recovers from jet lag. This way, the worker will not have a single second of pause as soon as he steps outside the airport concourse. The evil plan includes endless business meetings until they finally arrive at the house set up for the doctor. Planning to keep everything under control, the student smiles, imagining the extreme exhaustion he will cause the older man. Besides, the expert's arrival was supposed to be a grand event with reporters and giant welcome banners. However, the actual reception has only the Heir intern and his loyal assistant manager holding a simple sign. In the boy's mind, the veteran employee would freak out with anger seeing an inexperienced kid overworking him. The delusion continues with the older gentleman demanding respect and complaining about the lack of consideration for not having downtime. Right after, the illusion shows the genius running for a taxi and threatening to return to America because of the abusive itinerary. Having this perfect scene in mind, the boy flashes a malicious smile thinking his sabotage strategy is flawless. But his imagination is cut short when the secretary announces the famous doctor has just crossed the arrival gates. Wearing a yellow sweater, the mustached researcher walks dragging his suitcase while trying to understand his surroundings. Waving his hand, the manager calls the guest over and thanks him for making such a long trip to work with them. Greeting the newcomer, the employee says it is an honor to receive him and notes they had only spoken on the phone before. Taking the lead, the student flashes a friendly smile and formally introduces himself, saying it is a pleasure to meet him. Reaching out very politely, the newcomer accepts the college student's friendly handshake. The scientist states his full name while the protagonist congratulates the researcher for finally returning to the country. Observing the nearly empty place, the expert finds the silence strange and asks if only the two of them came for the reception. Showing no guilt, the Heir confirms the situation, claiming they decided to skip the ceremony because they were short on time. With that, the boy asks the guest to hand his luggage to the secretary and orders everyone to start moving immediately. Confused by the rush, the suited gentleman asks if they are going to the hotel and gets a simple no for an answer. Keeping a calm face, the Heir warns that the doctor has a massive amount of things to handle that day. With a sinister look, the boy details the insane itinerary involving 2 hours on the road and visits to distant branches. Deep down, the young man feels a little sorry for the guest who will be dragged from place to place without a right to rest. But the guilt quickly vanishes as the intern flashes an excited smile thinking about the valuable building he will get from this plan. Smiling in a friendly way, the young man asks the guest to follow him quickly because their free time is very short. In shock amidst the shadows, the mustached man questions the decision to skip the party and go straight to the research facility. With his glasses lenses shining from pure tension, the doctor asks if that bizarre schedule is truly real. Closing his eyes and feigning sympathy, the boy confirms the information while apologizing for it. But surprisingly, the researcher grabs the boy's shoulders with a huge smile of joy and praises his attitude. Totally panicked, the student's eyes widen, not understanding why he is receiving such unexpected congratulations. Scared, the protagonist wonders if there is some hidden and violent meaning behind the scientist's catchphrase. Emotional, the veteran states the young man read his mind perfectly while the college student stutters, confused by it all. Keeping his smile, the doctor explains he hates superficial parties full of reporters just to flatter his image. Pacing the room, he highlights what a huge waste of time it would be to be stuck in a fancy hotel doing nothing. Wiping away a tear, the older man reveals he has never seen someone with such true passion for little semiconductors. Pointing energetically, the expert praises the Heir, who reacts with a terrified face at the crazy scene. Running excitedly, the guest feels his energy boil and tells the boys to hurry so they can start the hard work. With his mouth open, the intern turns completely pale, trying to process the major failure of that terrible sabotage. Examining the entire research institute, the genius displays unbelievable strength for someone who just got off a flight. Tired of running down the halls, the boy cries as he realizes the situation flipped and he became the one trapped. Later, the visitor shakes hands with the boy's grandfather, showing off an illuminated aura as if he had grown decades younger. Showing total confidence in that new project, the suited man overflows with a purely invigorated and powerful energy. Looking like a ghost in the car seat, the protagonist almost passes out when the exhausting shift comes to an end that night. Crying in frustration, the Heir bitterly regrets creating the exact opposite effect in yet another one of his plans. In the following days, local newspapers announced the opening of the giant tech center led by the smart veteran. Dominating the top of the national market, the two biggest rival companies observed the sudden movement in the electronics sector. However, these competing corporations lack the advanced technology needed to design the most modern parts. Under pressure in the economic landscape, the giants opened briefcases full of cash to buy out smaller companies. Laughing out of desperation, the executives of the corporations end up relying entirely on scientific advancement coming from the outside. Surfing the wave of success, the brilliant director takes the boys' family company to the top of the tech battle. Wearing a varsity jacket, the college student understands the innovation department has permanently slipped from his hands. Walking near the college's grand gate, the boy realizes internally that he has no more room for new slip-ups. Imagining an entire building getting destroyed, he fears losing his beautiful inheritance if he makes a fatal mistake against the actual company. Sighing in frustration on the sidewalk, the rich boy bans the technological sabotage and quickly looks for another urgent way out. Noticing a large decorative banner up high, the boy wonders about the university event taking place. With students walking happily through the booths, the protagonist notes the institution indeed has its own party. Shortly after, his friend with glasses tells the boy not to get his hopes up about that celebration on campus. Try to understand what he meant. The other friend thinks it should be fun while the taller one pities his innocence. Holding up 3 fingers, the young man asks if his buddy has never heard of the 3 biggest idiots at that university. Being quite informative, he explains the first type of idiot is the one who gets off at the college's own train station. Continuing the list, the second case involves annoying students who love to brag about being top of their class in high school. Finally, the boy points out the third category is made up of people who take this festival way too seriously. Laughing at the situation, the buddy defends the party while hearing that last year they just grilled meat and left. Walking calmly, the Heir agrees that people like that exist and reinforces his total lack of interest in the event. Sometime later, the professor calls roll in a large classroom full of seated students. Raising his hand calmly, the protagonist confirms his attendance as soon as he hears the man say his name. Then the educator announces the director wants to have dinner with the boy after class, and the boy is quite surprised by the invite. Sweating cold, the young man hears the whispers of his classmates who think the event is a complete novelty on campus. Overcome with extreme irritation, the rich college student closes his eyes and mentally wonders when they will leave him alone. Desperate to escape the trap, he immediately remembers the explanation about the 3 big idiots of the place. Thereupon, the boy's memory focuses exactly on the type of person who usually takes the college fair very seriously. Smirking, the student replies with full confidence, stating he will not be able to attend dinner with the director. A bit awkwardly, the employee agrees to postpone the meeting but kindly asks the reason behind such a direct refusal. Using his wild plan, the boy beams with happiness as he announces he will need to prepare intensely for the festival. Hearing the absurd excuse, the other students look back in shock, wondering if the Heir has lost his mind. Leaning on the desk, the fake enthusiast declares he cannot stand by watching the event's reputation worsen over time. Radiating a heroic energy, the boy opens his arms, taking responsibility for changing everything about that annual party. Later, the scene shifts to a highly crowded popular market with several traditional food stalls. Being served at the table, a plate full of boiled pork draws attention for its generous portions for big groups. With the help of wooden chopsticks, a juicy piece of meat is lifted in the air, ready to be eaten with gusto. Chewing with satisfaction, the suited man is happy to have traveled to that distant place just for a meal. Sitting across from him, the college student notifies his veteran colleague about the phone ringing in the middle of their tasty meal. Looking at the screen of the large old device, the guy recognizes the number and figures it is a direct call from the editor-in-chief. Promptly answering the call, the boy introduces himself as a reporter for the local paper with a polite smile on his face. Speaking on the phone with a wide smile, the young man greets the man and cordially asks how he has been. On the other end of the line, the journalist immediately stops eating and his eyes widen upon recognizing the boy's name. With his bowl of soup getting cold on the table, the reporter listens to the student claim he has a great story for him. Very curious, the older man says he is paying attention, while the Heir reveals his company is going to fund the party. Confused, the worker grabs a pen, noting that it would not yield much until the boy mentions 3 major local stars. Imagine the country's 3 biggest singers on stage. The man hears the fake promise that all of them would be invited. Greatly surprised by the magnitude of that information, the editor's eyes widen very dramatically. Eager for news, the guy with the goatee asks if everything is confirmed and agrees to make the article happen. Jumping up from his chair excitedly, he demands guarantees, but the college student uses his family's weight to ensure success. Backing down a bit, the veteran claims he cannot publish vague rumors, but the boy begs for a vote of confidence. Giving in to the requests, the reporter writes the scandalous headline in his notebook and decides to bet all his chips on it. Because of this conversation, the front page of the next day's paper splashes the news about the 3 famous singers. Tossing the printed piece of paper on the table, the Heir notes that his plan's chessboard is perfectly set. Showing a radiant face of pure happiness, the young man celebrates internally, declaring that nobody can stop this. Satisfied with how things are going, he sits quietly in a large library, carefully reading a book. Breaking the silence in the room, his loyal secretary holds the tabloid doubtfully and gets his leader's attention. Tapping the cover of the report, the employee admits he trusts the orders he was given but confesses he does not understand it. Raising his hand with questions, the suited man points out the madness of spreading rumors before hiring the artists. Closing his book excitedly, the college student explains that building high expectations brings the best results. Showing off a lot of confidence, the boy defends the tactic of hyping up the students and attracting the media early to help their image. Sweating cold, the secretary warns that failing would stain the group's name and imagines the extreme fury of the boy's grandfather upon finding out. Laughing carefree, the Heir reassures his partner, letting him know the feared old man just traveled far away. Illustrating the situation, a map reveals the rich man's long trip across the skies toward the European electronics market. Remembering his relative's stubbornness, the young man notes how the old guy insisted on traveling, and now the country has become his free amusement park. Standing up in the library, the student asks him to calm down, assuring him the family leader will be proud of this motivational move. Clenching his fist firmly, he gives a speech about the importance of balancing hard work with really fun parties. Quickly, the excited expression vanishes, making way for a cold look as the boy admits the absurdity of his own lies. Watching television with his relative in the past, the boy noticed the leader does not care about bands or college events. Having a calculating mind, the Heir predicts that the main focus right now is to watch the gossip grow until it spins out of control. Imagining his grandfather's shock over in Europe, the young man hopes the rich guy finds out about the party mess and pushes him away for good. Thus, the illusion shows the relative ranting furiously to kick the student out for focusing only on parties. Bathed in a green light, the Heir cracks a dark smile, fully certain that this would be the leader's reaction. Returning to reality, the protagonist notices his secretary's weird look and admits he went overboard with his new trick. Quickly changing the subject, the boy announces he will walk down to the campus to take a detailed look at the big events locations. Grabbing his backpack, the student tells the employee to book the artists on behalf of the company, leaving the man quite shocked. Smiling cynically, the college student says he would love to handle the paperwork but claims he has no free time for it. Showing all his cunning, he argues the singer's agencies will feel much more honored getting the call. Very worried, the secretary points out that using the corporate name without the rich man's approval would be extremely dangerous. Tapping his colleague's shoulder, the boy insists the task suits his position perfectly since it involves important external affairs. Giving a thumbs up, the boy praises the veteran, calling him the office's great ace and reinforcing his trust in his work. Opening the door to leave, the Heir dumps the problem, thinking the man will need to pull off pure magic in 1 week. With a massive smile on his face, the protagonist mentally wishes good luck for the success of that poor assistant manager. With absolutely no reaction, the man with glasses stands totally paralyzed in the empty room, absorbing the shock of the door slamming shut. Out of his companion's sight, the student walks down the dark hallway flashing a diabolical smile over his sly tactic. Due to the newspaper circulating fast, the young man's aunt ends up being the first person in the family to find out about the scandal. Outraged by the news, she hears firm confirmation from one of her suited men about who caused that massive mess. Holding an expensive makeup item, the lady flashes a toxic smile and views the situation as a completely ridiculous disaster. Closing her mirror abruptly, she wastes no time and demands the employee contact her brother's private line. Spreading like wildfire, the gossip reaches the brother, who answers the phone in his office and complains about having to tell the old leader. Acting highly dismissive, the woman tells her older brother to think whatever he wants and simply hangs up the annoying call. Keeping the device near his ear, the Heir's father hears only dead silence and gets a look of pure frustration. Putting the object back on the desk, the gentleman lets out a slight sigh and tells himself he has already fulfilled his difficult duty. Casting a thoughtful side glance, he focuses on the cover of the newspaper lying on the desk, displaying the massive chaos regarding the singers. Accepting the bitter mission, the man uses the old rotary phone to proceed with the college student's devious gossip. Flashing a wicked smile, the relative decides to report the crisis, and everything follows the exact path the clever protagonist envisioned. Changing the scenery, the narrative shifts far from all this family gossip, showing an environment focused on selling old radios. Next, the large venue reveals itself to be a grand expo containing countless fans and washing machines. Several well-dressed men walk through the huge pavilions looking at the display of household innovations in cold Germany. Evaluating a new product up close, the protagonist's strict grandfather shoots a look demanding answers from his bald partner about an agreement. Using a superior tone, the rich leader calls the man by his name, and the guy stutters, trembling with fear before the powerful old man. Walking through the fair, the elderly man asks if the company's booth is ready and asks to be guided around the place. Arriving at the spot, he comes across an almost empty area containing only a few old appliances. Seeing that, the chairman scowls with extreme anger while his bald partner sweats cold out of pure despair. Later at the hotel, the rich man yells the employee's name down the hallways, showing off all his fury. Totally paralyzed, the worker answers affirmatively and shrinks before the intimidating posture. Pointing his finger, the old man questions the quality of their space and complains about being tossed in a dirty corner. Crumpling a colorful fabric, the veteran asks if his subordinate noticed the grandeur of the rival companies. Exalted, he claims their lack of care is embarrassing the whole nation in front of the foreign market. Bowing his body as a sign of respect, the bald subordinate sincerely apologizes for the huge mistake made. Not accepting the apology, the boss throws several pamphlets at the man and tells him to resign if he is useless. Closing his eyes in exhaustion, the chairman laments the situation and doubts their future in semiconductors. Sitting in his armchair, the older gentleman concludes he would never have known about that absolute disaster if he had stayed in the country. Then the hotel room door slowly opens and another employee informs him about an important call coming from home. Trying to understand the urgency, the old man hears that the head of the commerce division wants to talk to him right now. Looking at the papers on the floor, the chairman figures it must be a major crisis for his son to call at that time. With a wave of his hand, the boss dismisses the two workers from the room so he can focus on the phone calmly. Through the room's receiver, the second Heir's voice echoes, greeting his relative and wishing him a great trip. Annoyed by the stalling, the veteran tells the man to get straight to the point and hears that there's a big problem. Flashing an evil smile, the executive reports that the student caused a huge mess while he was away. Widening one eye, the patriarch mentions his grandson's name, showing shock upon hearing the confirmation of everything. The gossiper details the fake promises about famous people at the party, and the older man gets confused by the terms used. Showing the picture of the musicians, the man warns that the boy used the company's name to recruit the artists. Escalating the lie, the suited man claims the boy took control of the event in front of his whole class. Keeping his cynical look, the uncle snitches on his nephew's promise about changing all the celebration rules. Holding the receiver with his back to the door, the leader processes the information and sees it as a huge embarrassment. Reading from a report, the villain points out the improper use of corporate funds to finance the musical acts. A brief silence takes over the line while the rich man grips the device, absorbing the severity of the betrayal. Staring at the television flyers dropped on the rug, the patriarch decrees he will need to punish the young man strictly. Putting on dark sunglasses, the old man sits imposingly and calls an emergency meeting with the company directors. At that, the smiling uncle loses his composure and his eyes widen upon being forced to attend the emergency board meeting. Holding papers at his desk, the executive is completely confused by the order and calls out to the older man without understanding why.